I always thought the company I worked for judged people by their performance, not by who they were or where they came from. 4 years, I stayed late when everyone else went home, fixed problems nobody else wanted to deal with, and quietly handled tasks that weren't even part of my job. I didn't complain. I didn't expect special treatment, but I did expect fairness, at least a little respect. So when the annual awards ceremony came around, a night everyone in the office looked forward to, a night where the best employees were recognized, I honestly believed my invitation would arrive like it always did. Maybe this time, I would even hear my name called on stage. But instead, one Monday morning, I opened my inbox and froze. There it was, a short email, cold, formal, as if it had been copied, pasted, and sent without a second thought. Due to recent internal decisions, you will not be attending this year's awards ceremony. No explanation, no reason, no apology, just that. At first, I genuinely thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was sent to the wrong person. Maybe there was a technical glitch. I refreshed the page twice, then 3 times, hoping for another message correcting the first one. But nothing changed. The email stayed there, staring back at me like a door being slowly shut in my face. I remember sitting at my desk, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, trying to understand what I had done wrong. Everything around me felt normal, the tapping of keyboards, the low murmur of conversations, the soft buzz of the air conditioner, but inside me, something was shifting. It felt like the room was shrinking, like my world was suddenly too tight. What made it worse was watching everyone else talk excitedly about the event. Who they were going with, what they planned to wear, which awards they thought they might win. Normally, I would have been part of those conversations. Now I stood quietly in the background, pretending the email hadn't bothered me, pretending I didn't feel like I had been pushed to the outside. It wasn't even about the award. It was the humiliation. The fact that the company I had given years of loyalty to wasn't even willing to give me a seat in the audience. I wasn't asking for applause. I just didn't want to be erased. All day, I kept checking my emails, waiting for someone, anyone from HR or management to follow up. But no one did. Hours passed. People chatted. Meetings continued. Coffee cups clinked. And yet that one message echoed in my mind nonstop. By lunchtime, I felt something else. Something sharper than confusion or hurt. I felt anger. Quiet, controlled, steady anger. Not the type that makes you shout or slam things. This was the type that makes you think clearly. The type that makes you pay attention to every detail you overlooked before. And suddenly, small things started to make sense. A few weeks earlier, I noticed a couple of managers whispering when I walked by. My supervisor had begun acting strangely around me, polite but distant. A big project I had been expecting to lead was suddenly handed to someone else. None of it felt serious at the time, but now, looking back, it felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle that were finally clicking into place. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't an accident. The truth is, I wasn't the type of person who likes causing trouble. I avoided office politics, stayed far from drama, and minded my own business. But when you push a quiet person too far, they don't explode. They investigate. They watch. They think. They wait for the right moment to respond. And that moment arrived sooner than I expected. It happened that same evening, when most people had already left. I stayed behind, staring at the awards ceremony announcement on the company website, trying to understand how everyone else was included except me. The more I stared, the more frustrated I became. And then suddenly, the frustration shifted into clarity. There was something I knew. Something everyone else had forgotten. And the company probably assumed I would forget too. But I didn't. I opened a blank email and sat there for a long time, thinking. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, steady and patient, waiting for my words. Part of me was scared. Part of me wondered if I should just let it go and avoid making things worse. But another part, stronger, wiser, knew that staying silent would only confirm whatever assumptions had been made about me. So I began typing. Slowly at first, carefully, then faster, as the words started pouring out. Not angry words, not emotional accusations, just the truth. Clear, undeniable facts. Things I had kept to myself for months. Things that, if revealed, could change more than just my situation. Halfway through writing the email, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization of what I was about to do. If I sent this, there was no undoing it. It could bring justice or chaos. It could make things better or burn every bridge I had ever built in the company. But one thing was certain, I couldn't pretend anymore. They had crossed the line, and now it was my turn to respond. When I finished writing, I reread the message twice. Every sentence was clean, precise. No emotion, no accusations, just truth backed by evidence. The kind of message that couldn't be ignored. The only question left was whether I had the courage to hit send. My finger hovered over the mouse. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The office was silent. The lights above flickered slightly, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then, in one small motion, I clicked. The email was gone. Delivered. And within the next 24 hours, everything in the company changed. But not in the way I expected. Because the moment that email landed in the wrong person's inbox, or maybe the right one, my world shifted in a way I couldn't have imagined. People who had ignored me suddenly wanted private meetings. Managers who had looked down on me now spoke with cautious respect. And the award ceremony? Let's just say it became the smallest part of a much bigger story. I didn't know it then, but the email I sent that night wasn't just a reply. It wasn't just a request for fairness. It was the spark that exposed something hidden, something the company had tried to bury. Something that was about to come back to the surface, with force. And the moment I realized what I had accidentally triggered, it was already too late to undo. After sending the email, I expected at least a few hours of silence. Maybe a day. I thought people would read it slowly, discuss it quietly, and then reach out to me whenever they were ready. But the next morning, something felt different the moment I walked into the building. The usual noise of the lobby, the clicking heels, the casual greetings, the elevator chime, felt strangely muted, like everyone was speaking at a lower volume. Like the air itself was heavier. I tapped my employee card against the scanner, and for a second, it hesitated before turning green. I don't know why, but even that tiny delay sent a chill through me. It felt like the system itself had been updated overnight, like something had shifted behind the scenes. When I stepped into the elevator, 2 coworkers were already inside. Normally, they would smile or at least nod. Today, they went quiet the moment they saw me. One of them even pressed the close button a little too fast, as if avoiding a conversation. I stood in the corner, pretending not to notice, but the silence wrapped around us like a warning. My floor came, the doors opened, and I walked out without saying anything. But inside, my thoughts were racing. Someone had definitely read the email. At first, I thought maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe they were just having a bad morning. But the second I stepped into my department, every doubt disappeared. People were whispering. Not loudly, not obviously, but enough for me to catch glimpses, quick glances in my direction, hushed tones, awkward pauses when I walked by. It wasn't hostility. It was curiosity, confusion, maybe even fear. My manager, who usually arrived after me, was already sitting in his office with the blinds half closed. His face looked tense, like he had barely slept. He kept checking his phone, tapping it against the table. I could feel his eyes flicker toward me, through the glass, every few minutes. I tried to settle into my routine, but everything felt out of sync. My computer took longer than usual to load. My inbox was flooded with messages, but none were the kind I expected. No response to the email yet. No explanation for the award ban. Just regular tasks, meetings, reminders, as if the entire company was pretending everything was normal while something underneath was cracking. Around 10 a.m., HR sent a message to the whole department saying a mandatory meeting would be held later that day. No subject, no details, just a time. People exchanged looks, and for the first time, I saw something like panic in their eyes. It made me wonder just how many people knew what was happening and how many had been covering it up. The funny thing is, nobody asked me directly about the email. They didn't need to. The shift in behavior told me enough. Someone in authority had seen what I wrote, and instead of dealing with it quietly, it had triggered movement, meetings, concerns, questions. But the real shock came when my manager finally stepped out of his office and walked straight to my desk. He stopped right in front of me, hands clasped too tightly, voice a little too soft. Can we talk? I nodded, and he motioned toward the small conference room nearby. As we walked, I noticed how everyone watched us, pretending to stay focused but failing miserably. When the door closed behind us, he took a deep breath, like he wasn't sure how to start. I saw your email, he said finally. I didn't respond. I wanted him to keep talking. He continued slowly, choosing his words carefully. It reached some people higher up. They're discussing it, and they want to understand a few things before moving forward. The way he said, higher up, made my stomach twist. I had expected HR, maybe a department head, not people beyond that level. Not the kind who rarely interacted with us unless something major was happening. I didn't accuse anyone, I said calmly. I just stated what I know. And that's the issue, he replied quietly. You know things you weren't supposed to know. Those words sat heavily between us. I could sense he regretted saying them the moment they slipped out, but it was already too late. His expression shifted. He looked stressed, not angry, not confrontational, just genuinely worried. Before I could ask anything else, there was a knock on the door. A woman from HR peeked inside. They need you upstairs, she said to him. Then her eyes flickered to me, not unkind but cautious. And they want to speak with you afterward. He nodded to her, gave me a weak smile, and left. She closed the door. For a moment, I just sat there alone, trying to understand what upstairs meant in this context. That was the floor where the top executives worked. The floor most employees never saw unless something serious was going on. I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or terrified. I returned to my desk, pretending everything was normal, but inside, every second felt stretched. I watched the elevator numbers. People went up and down. Time passed slowly, painfully. And then, as if the universe wanted to add more tension, another email landed in my inbox. Please remain at your workstation. Someone will come get you shortly. No name. No signature. Just instructions. My heart beat a little faster, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't in trouble. I hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, I had uncovered something that had been ignored for too long. Still, the uncertainty kept pressing on me. 10 minutes later, a man I had never seen before approached my desk. He wasn't from my department. He didn't even look like someone who worked in this part of the building. His badge was a different color, one reserved for senior-level access. They're ready for you, he said. I followed him toward the elevator, feeling dozens of eyes trailing me. Everyone pretended to keep working, but the silence in the room said otherwise. It felt like I was walking toward something that would change the rest of my story, something much bigger than an award ceremony. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Everything was quieter, colder, more polished. Glass walls, dark wood, soft lighting. The kind of place where serious decisions were made. The man led me to a small meeting room with frosted glass. Inside were two people, one from HR, one from the legal department. They greeted me politely, almost too politely, as if they weren't sure how I would react. We just want to understand the information you shared, the legal officer said. This isn't disciplinary. We're simply clarifying a few points. I nodded, keeping my face calm even though my mind was spiraling. They started asking questions. How long had I known? Who told me? When did I first notice something unusual? Had I talked to anyone else? Every question felt like it was designed to measure not just what I knew, but how much damage I could cause if I chose to. I answered honestly, but carefully. I didn't want to exaggerate anything. And I didn't want to expose anyone who wasn't involved. My focus stayed only on the facts, what I saw, what I heard, what I documented. Their expressions shifted slightly with every detail I shared, as if my answers confirmed things they had tried to ignore. At one point, the HR representative glanced at the legal officer and said quietly, "This aligns with what we suspected." They didn't think I heard them, but I did. The meeting lasted almost an hour. When it ended, they thanked me, told me not to discuss anything with coworkers, and said they would be in touch soon. I walked out, unsure whether I felt relieved or unsettled. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a door had opened, but on the other side was a hallway full of unanswered questions. By the time I returned to my floor, the office was louder again, but the energy had changed. People avoided looking at me directly. Conversations stopped when I approached. Even my closest colleagues seemed nervous around me, as if they didn't know whether speaking to me would get them involved. All afternoon, my mind replayed everything. My email, the meeting, the vague comments, the tension in the air. It was clear now, the issue wasn't the award ceremony at all. That had just been the tipping point, the final push. Something deeper was happening behind the scenes. Something hidden. Something that someone didn't want exposed. But I had already taken the first step. The truth was out, and whatever was coming next, I could feel it moving closer. What I didn't know then was that the email I sent wasn't just a spark. It was the beginning of a fire I couldn't control, and the consequences were about to reach far beyond me. I spent the rest of that day pretending everything was normal, but a part of me knew the company wasn't done with me yet. Something about the way the HR representative said, "We'll be in touch soon," made it clear they weren't just verifying details. They were preparing for something larger, something that had been simmering below the surface long before I sent that email. And now, for the first time, someone had put it in writing. That night, when I got home, I didn't feel relief. I kept replaying the meeting in my mind, the quick glances between HR and legal, the way their expressions tightened when I mentioned certain dates, the hesitation in their questions. It felt like they knew more than they were letting on. A lot more. I opened my laptop and stared at my sent email again. The words looked heavier now, almost like they carried a weight I hadn't felt when I wrote them. I wondered if I had done the right thing. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew I didn't have a choice. Staying silent would have made me part of the problem. Speaking up might make me a target, but at least it made me honest. I barely slept that night. The next morning, when I walked into the office, the atmosphere felt even stranger than before. People weren't whispering anymore, they were watching. Not openly, not aggressively, but quietly, with curiosity and caution mixed into every glance. Even the receptionist, who always greeted me with a warm smile, looked unsure whether to say hello. As I made my way to my desk, one of my closest coworkers, Sana, stood up and hurried toward me. Her expression was tense, her voice low. "I need to talk to you." We walked to a corner of the break room, far from everyone else. She checked over her shoulder twice before speaking. "What did you send?" she whispered. "People are saying your email caused some kind of internal review." I stayed calm. I just told the truth. She looked at me long and hard, like she wanted to say something but was scared. Then she finally lowered her voice even more. "There's something happening upstairs. A lot of meetings. Departments being questioned. I heard your manager was with legal for over an hour yesterday." She paused. "They wouldn't do all this unless your email hit something sensitive." I felt a small knot form in my stomach. If they were digging that deep, it meant whatever I exposed wasn't small. Maybe it wasn't even about me at all. Maybe it was part of something larger, something that had been building for months. Before I could ask Sana anything else, someone entered the room and she quickly stepped back, pretending we were talking about something unimportant. I returned to my desk, my mind even more clouded than before. 2 hours later, a company-wide announcement popped up on everyone's screen. It wasn't long, but it was serious. Effective immediately, certain internal procedures will be reviewed. Some departments may be temporarily audited. Cooperation is mandatory. No details, no explanations. Just a formal message hinting that something big was happening behind closed doors. People started talking quietly again, and this time, I didn't have to guess. I knew my email had triggered at least part of this. I didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. The day went on slowly, tension hanging in the air like a storm that refused to break. Mid-afternoon, I received a message from HR asking me to attend another meeting the next morning. The subject line simply said, "Follow-up." I stared at the screen, trying to steady my breathing. There was no way this was just a routine check-in. Something new had come up, something they couldn't ignore. That evening, I stayed back in the office after most people had left. I wanted silence, a moment to collect my thoughts. I found myself walking toward the big glass window near the end of the floor, a spot where I often stood when I needed to think. The city lights glimmered below, the glow reflecting on the glass like fragments of broken stars. For a few minutes, I just stood there, letting the quiet settle in. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mr. Ray, a man from another department, but someone I had always respected. He wasn't high-ranking, but he paid attention to things others ignored. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "Rough week?" he asked softly. I nodded but didn't speak. He stepped beside me, looking out the window. "You know, sometimes the truth isn't the problem. It's the people who are afraid of it." I looked at him, surprised. "You heard?" He gave a half smile. "Everyone heard something. No one knows everything." I waited for him to continue, sensing he had more to say. "There have been issues," he said carefully. "Not just in your department. Things people tried to hide. Mistakes. Decisions that weren't made fairly. And whenever someone gets close to discovering the pattern, something happens to push them away." "What kind of things?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, choosing his words like someone walking across thin ice. "Transfers, sudden job changes, being excluded, small things at first. But over time, it becomes a pattern." He paused. "Your award ceremony, Ben, wasn't random." His words settled into my chest heavily. It confirmed what I already suspected but hadn't dared to say out loud. "What should I do now?" I asked. He didn't give advice. He didn't warn me. He just said, "Be careful who you trust." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with those 5 words echoing in my head. The next morning came faster than I expected. I barely touched breakfast. My hands felt cold as I made my way to the office. When I reached the HR floor, the same legal officer from before was waiting, but this time he wasn't alone. A senior director sat beside him, someone I had only ever seen from a distance at company events. They invited me in politely. Too politely. The director leaned forward slightly. "We appreciate your cooperation, but we need you to understand something. What you shared has opened a series of investigations. Some people are not happy." I didn't look away. I didn't lie. "We know," he said. "And that's why this is complicated." They began asking deeper questions this time. Questions about conversations I overheard months ago. About projects that were reassigned without explanation. About names, dates, patterns. They weren't looking for surface-level information now. They were digging, and every answer I gave seemed to reinforce something they had already suspected. At one point, the legal officer asked, "Did anyone try to discourage you from speaking up?" That question told me everything. Someone had done something wrong. Someone powerful enough that the company had to tread carefully. When the meeting finally ended, they thanked me again, but the director added one last line that made my heart tighten. "Until this is resolved, things may feel unusual. Keep your routine. Stay calm. And if anything out of the ordinary happens, report it immediately." Out of the ordinary. As if the past week had been anything but. I walked out of the room feeling even more uneasy. The truth was spreading. People were panicking. Departments were being checked. And I could feel the tension getting tighter with each passing hour. Back at my desk, I opened my inbox. A new message had arrived, anonymous, no name, no signature. "Be careful. Someone is trying to shift the blame." I stared at the screen, my pulse rising. Someone inside the company knew something. Someone was warning me, or maybe trying to scare me. Either way, it was too late to turn back now. Because whatever had been buried inside this company was starting to rise to the surface. The anonymous message stayed on my screen long after I read it. I kept staring at the words, trying to figure out who could have sent it. Everyone in the office seemed tense, but no one looked like the type to send secret warnings. And yet, someone knew something. Someone was close enough to the situation to understand what I had stepped into. I deleted the message carefully, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I knew anything unusual sitting in my inbox could draw attention. And right now, the last thing I needed was attention from the wrong people. The rest of the day passed in a strange mix of silence and tension. People walked around like they were walking on eggshells. Whispering became the new normal. Doors that were usually open stayed shut. Meetings that normally lasted 10 minutes now stretched into hours with blinds drawn and voices kept low. Even from my desk, I could feel something intensifying behind every closed door. At one point, I saw my manager pacing down the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he passed my desk, he paused for the slightest second, as if he wanted to say something, but then he continued walking. His shoulders were tense, and the way he ran a hand through his hair told me he was under more pressure than he had ever handled before. By evening, I felt drained, but I knew this wasn't the end. Something big was coming. I just didn't know from which direction. The next morning started normally enough, but within an hour, the office felt unusually quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the silence right before a storm. Then I saw two people I had never seen before enter the floor. They wore visitor badges marked Internal Affairs. They walked straight toward one of the meeting rooms with an HR representative guiding them. People exchanged looks, their eyes wide, their hands frozen mid-typing. A few seconds later, the conference room blinds snapped shut. This wasn't normal. This wasn't routine. This was the kind of thing that only happened when something serious had been discovered. The next hour felt like an entire day. One by one, certain employees were called into that room. Some left looking pale. Others looked angry. A few looked relieved, as if something long hidden had finally been exposed. Whatever was happening in there was reaching deeper into the company than I imagined. I kept waiting for my name to be called, but it never came. And that alone made the tension worse. It felt like they were saving me for something. For the end. For the moment, everything connected. Around lunchtime, Sana came to my desk with a worried look. "They asked about you," she whispered. "Not just your email. They asked what you knew and who you talked to." I felt a chill run through me. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "I told them you keep to yourself. But, listen, you need to be careful. People are nervous. Someone is trying to pin things on anyone they can." I didn't want to drag her into this, but I appreciated her honesty. Before she walked away, she added quietly, "If anything feels off, tell me. Don't ignore it." For the first time since this began, I felt a flicker of fear. Real fear. The kind that whispers you're getting too close to something dangerous. Later that afternoon, as I was packing up some files, I noticed something odd. My access to certain documents had been restricted. Files I normally use every week suddenly required permission. At first, I thought it was just part of the internal review. But then, I tried opening a different set of folders, ones connected to a project I had mentioned in my email. Access denied. A cold realization hit me. Someone was blocking my access. Not the company. Someone specific. Someone who knew exactly which files would make the situation clear. This wasn't an investigation anymore. This was a cover-up. I leaned back in my chair, thinking through everything slowly. The missing invitation. The reassigned projects. The meetings behind closed doors. My manager's nervous behavior. The sudden audits. The restricted files. The anonymous warning. It all pointed to one thing. Someone high up was hiding something, and my email had forced them into a corner. I didn't know who they were yet, but I could sense the walls tightening around them. And around me. By 5 p.m., most people had left early, pretending they had errands or appointments, but really escaping the tension. I stayed behind, trying to organize my thoughts. I didn't trust the quiet anymore. It made everything feel sharper, more exposed. As I walked toward the elevator, I noticed a faint reflection in the glass wall near the corner office. Someone was inside. I couldn't see clearly, but the silhouette looked familiar. Broad shoulders, precise movements, someone used to giving orders rather than taking them. Curiosity made me pause for just a moment, and in that moment, I saw something I shouldn't have seen. A document on the desk. My name printed on it. Before I could focus on more details, the person inside turned slightly, and I forced myself to walk away casually, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. But my heart was pounding hard. Someone was reviewing something related to me, and not in the normal HR way. This felt personal, strategic. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching every move I made at work. The conversations, the questions, the sudden changes, they all hinted at a deeper conflict I had only scratched the surface of. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the restricted files, the meetings, the anonymous message, the silhouette in the office, my name on that document. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. Someone was preparing something, and I wasn't sure if it was to protect themselves or to target me. The next morning, things escalated even more. When I entered the office, 3 executives were already on the floor, something that almost never happened. They moved quickly, speaking quietly to select employees and taking notes. People avoided eye contact, choosing to stare at their screens as if any wrong expression could drag them into the mess. Halfway through the morning, my manager appeared at my desk looking more stressed than ever. "Can you step into the conference room?" he said. His tone made my stomach twist. I followed him, and the moment I walked in, I saw them, the HR rep, the legal officer, and the same senior director from before. But this time, the atmosphere was heavier, sharper, like whatever was about to happen would change everything. The director didn't waste time. "We found new information," he said. "Information that connects directly to what you reported." My heartbeat picked up. "We need to ask you some important questions before we proceed, questions related to a situation that has become far more serious than we initially understood." I swallowed hard. "What situation?" The director exchanged a glance with the legal officer before answering. "The one someone tried to hide? The one your email exposed?" He leaned forward, his voice low, his eyes fixed on mine. "And before we move forward, you need to know, someone in this company has been trying to shift responsibility. And their attempt may involve you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Someone was trying to frame me, or worse, make me the easiest target in a growing conflict. The director continued, "You are not under investigation, but you are at the center of something much larger. And before this reaches its peak, we need the truth. Every detail, every conversation, every clue you may have overlooked." The air in the room felt tight, almost suffocating. I realized then that everything I thought I understood was only the surface. The real conflict was just beginning to show itself. And whatever was coming next would be the most intense part of all. Because someone in the company wasn't just afraid of the truth. They were desperate to bury it. And I was the only one standing in the way. The moment I stepped out of that room, my heartbeat felt louder than my footsteps. Everything Lucas had just revealed kept replaying in my head like a warning I wasn't allowed to ignore. But before I could even process it, something else happened, something that shifted the entire story again and pushed me into a deeper mess than before. It all began with a single notification on my phone, one that showed up just as I reached the end of the hallway. A message, not from Lucas, not from HR, but from a blocked number that I hadn't seen since last year, a number I thought I deleted forever. At first I froze. For a second, I honestly considered ignoring it, but curiosity had already taken over whatever fear was holding me back. When I opened it, I instantly felt the tension in my shoulders tighten. The message said only one line, but that one line flipped everything upside down. "You're looking in the wrong direction. Check who approved the ban." The problem was, I already had looked. According to Lucas, the approval came straight from the executive board. But the message sounded too confident, too direct, like someone who was certain I had missed something. And the fact that it came from a blocked number made it feel even more suspicious. I didn't want to believe it, but suddenly my thoughts started racing through every interaction I'd had during the last few weeks. Every glance, every conversation, every odd silence in the hallway. It felt like pieces of a puzzle were scattered around me, and I was still only holding the corners without seeing the whole picture. I walked outside to breathe, but even the fresh air didn't calm me. Instead, I kept thinking of who could have sent that message. Was it someone inside the company? Someone who knew what was happening behind the scenes? Someone who didn't want their name to appear anywhere? I tried calling the number, but it instantly went to a dead tone. No ringing, no voicemail. Just a cold, empty sound that made the whole thing feel even more ominous. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't another message. It was an email. When I saw the name, my stomach dropped. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Michelle, the former head of my department who left suddenly without giving anyone a proper explanation. People whispered about burnout or a better job offer, but some believed she was pushed out quietly. I always wondered which one was closer to the truth. Her email wasn't long, but it carried the weight of something buried, something that had been waiting to surface. She wrote that she had seen my name come up in a conversation a week ago. She didn't say who mentioned it or why, but her final sentence hit me harder than anything else. Be careful. The award ceremony isn't the real problem. For a moment, I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel scared or angry. If it wasn't about the award ceremony, then what was the real issue? Why was I being banned? Why were people sending me warnings instead of explanations? A strange quietness settled over me, the kind that comes right before something important shifts. I suddenly realized that everything happening around me wasn't random. Someone was pulling strings. Someone who didn't want me to attend that ceremony for a reason that went far beyond trophies and speeches. I tried to connect dots in my head. Lucas's nervousness, the block number, Michelle's sudden email, the inconsistencies in the approval list. It all pointed to something larger, something hidden. As I walked back inside, I noticed a familiar figure leaning against the reception desk. It was Aaron, one of the senior managers. He rarely spoke to me unless it was about work, but now he looked unusually calm, almost expectant. When he saw me approaching, he smiled, too politely, too controlled. That alone made me tense. He asked if I had a minute. The way he said it felt less like a request and more like a warning disguised as small talk. I nodded, even though my instinct screamed at me to walk away. He led me toward the empty lounge area, and for a while, he just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the glass window as if waiting for something. Finally, he spoke, and his first words didn't make sense to me at all. He asked how much I knew about the email I had sent earlier, the same email that had already pushed the story into chaos. The question threw me off. How did he even know I sent it? And what did he mean by how much I knew? His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, like someone trying to test how far another person had gotten in a maze. Before I could answer, he lowered his voice slightly and said, "Sometimes we get banned from things not because of what we did, but because of what we're about to find." I felt a chill go through me. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't a friendly warning either. It was something in between, something that carried more meaning than I could decode in the moment. I tried asking him what he meant, but he simply said it wasn't his place to explain. He walked away with the same calmness he arrived with, leaving me standing there more confused than ever. By now, the tension around me felt like a net tightening from all sides. Every time I thought I was close to understanding something, another piece appeared, contradicting everything. And deep down, I could sense that I was missing the most important part of all, the motive. Someone wanted me out of that ceremony. Someone wanted me silent. Someone wanted me to stop digging. But why? I reached my desk, intending to clear my head, but right as I sat down, I noticed something strange on my computer screen. A file was open. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even turned my computer on that morning. The document had no title, no sender, no signature. Just a single sentence typed in plain black text. "If you dig deeper, you won't like what you find." My hands went still. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too heavy, too expectant. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. Someone was watching. Someone was monitoring my steps, my conversations, even my doubts. The situation had officially become bigger than I imagined, and the worst part was the only way out now was through. And just as I took a breath, trying to figure out what to do next, another notification popped up on the screen. This time not a warning, not a threat, but an invitation. A calendar invite from an anonymous sender. The location was the last place I ever expected. The timing made no sense. But the title of the meeting was what froze everything around me. "Before you decide your next move." I stared at it, uncertain whether accepting it would bring answers or drag me deeper into the conflict. But one thing was clear, the story wasn't just escalating. It was shifting into something I wasn't prepared for. And whatever waited for me in that meeting was going to change everything again. When I finally accepted the anonymous meeting invite, I felt like I was stepping into a moment I couldn't avoid anymore. The location was one of the older conference rooms on the 5th floor, a place barely anyone used since the renovation. As I walked down the quiet hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoed in a way that made the whole building feel unfamiliar. I pushed open the door slowly, expecting maybe one person, maybe two, but instead, the room was dimly lit, and only a single figure sat inside, facing the window. When the person turned around, I froze. It was Michelle. I hadn't seen her since the day she left the company without a single farewell message. Seeing her now felt surreal, like a forgotten chapter suddenly opening again. She looked tired but steady, like someone who had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. She gestured for me to sit, and when I did, she began speaking without wasting a second. She told me she didn't resign by choice. She had been quietly pushed out after she discovered discrepancies in the company's internal award evaluations. Awards that were supposed to be based on fairness, transparency, and employee performance were actually influenced by a hidden committee, one that operated outside the official structure. They decided who rose and who didn't, who got recognition and who stayed invisible. And according to Michelle, I had become a threat to them without even realizing it. She explained everything in a rushed but controlled tone. The email I sent, the one that sparked everything, didn't cause the chaos. It simply revealed the chaos that was already happening behind the scenes. The committee didn't expect anyone to question their decisions, at least not someone like me who wasn't on their radar. When my performance reports showed numbers that couldn't be ignored, they quietly removed my name from the award list. But when people started noticing, that's when they panicked. The ban was their way of keeping me out of sight until things cooled down. Hearing it felt unreal. I had always believed the system was fair. That hard work eventually paid off. But now, it was clear that the system wasn't broken. It had been designed this way all along. I asked her why she contacted me now. She said she couldn't stay silent anymore. She didn't want what happened to her to happen to someone else. She had collected evidence, emails, meeting recordings, approval logs, and she believed I was the only one positioned to expose the truth without being immediately shut down. But before she could show me the final file, the door opened again. Lucas walked in. For a second, I thought maybe he had followed me, but the expression on his face told me something else. He already knew everything. He wasn't surprised to see Michelle. He wasn't shocked to hear what she was about to reveal. He looked almost resigned. He admitted that he had been aware of the hidden committee for months. He had tried speaking up once, but was warned to stay quiet if he valued his position. When he saw my name being removed from the awards ceremony, he wanted to help me without making himself a direct target. That's why he only hinted at things instead of explaining them clearly. He hoped that if I uncovered the truth myself, I could push the company into accountability in ways he couldn't. The pieces finally aligned in my head. The blocked messages, the anonymous warnings, the tension in everyone's behavior. None of it was random. It was all part of the same pattern, a system built on silence, yet slowly cracking from the inside. Michelle handed me a flash drive. She said this was everything she had gathered before being forced out. Proof that couldn't be ignored. Proof that explained why I was banned, why she was removed, and why Lucas had been terrified of saying too much. She told me to decide for myself how to use it. And that's when the real climax happened. Not in a dramatic confrontation, not in an argument, but in the decision I made right there in that quiet room. I chose to send one final email. Not to HR, not to the executive board, but to the entire company. I attached the evidence Michelle had collected and wrote a simple message. Everyone deserves to know the truth. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, the company's internal channels exploded with messages. Shock, confusion, support. People who had stayed silent for years finally spoke up. The hidden committee was confronted. Policies were exposed. And by the end of the next week, the entire system was officially dissolved. It was the biggest internal shakeup our company had ever seen. But just when I thought everything was finally resolved, something unexpected happened. A few days after the awards ceremony was rescheduled, with my name invited again this time, I received a private message from someone I didn't know. It wasn't threatening or angry. It was a single line, written in a calm, almost warning tone. There were 7 people on that committee. You exposed 6. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the return of that familiar tension. I had ended one battle, but someone out there was still hiding in the shadows, watching every move I made. And just like that, the story that I thought had reached its end suddenly opened a new unanswered question. One final twist, reminding me that even after the truth comes out, not every secret reveals itself completely. For a long moment, that final message, there were 7 people on that committee. You exposed 6, stayed on my screen like a shadow refusing to fade. It should have scared me, but instead it made me strangely calm. Maybe because after everything that had happened, this no longer felt like a threat. It felt like clarity, a reminder that not every loose end has to be tied for the story to end in peace. Still, I didn't want the unresolved part of the message to take away from everything we had just achieved. There had been real change, real accountability, and real voices finally being heard. One unknown person, hiding somewhere in the background, no longer felt powerful enough to shake that. Over the next few days, the company slowly returned to a rhythm that felt closer to honest. People I barely knew came to my desk to thank me, some quietly, some with relief written across their faces. For the first time, I realized how deeply the hidden committee had affected morale. There were employees who had stopped trying because they believed recognition was out of reach. Others worked themselves to exhaustion, hoping their effort would eventually be noticed, not knowing decisions were being made behind closed doors. When the truth came out, it gave everyone the freedom to breathe again, and you could feel it in the way people walked, talked, and even smiled. Lucas also changed. He wasn't nervous anymore. Instead, he looked lighter, like he had released a secret he'd been carrying for too long. One afternoon, he stopped by my desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. He said he wanted to apologize, not for what he did, but for what he couldn't. He explained that he had tried to protect me the only way he knew how, even if his silence made things harder. I understood. Sometimes people want to help, but are scared of the consequences. His presence during the chaos had mattered more than he realized. Michelle and I also stayed in touch. She didn't return to the company, but she did something even better. She started working as an independent consultant, helping organizations fix internal transparency issues. She told me that what happened to us at the company wasn't unique. Many places struggled with favoritism disguised as evaluation systems. She said my decision to expose the truth had inspired her to turn her difficult experience into something meaningful. Hearing that made me feel like what we went through had a purpose bigger than just clearing my own name. As for the award ceremony itself, it was rescheduled 2 weeks later. Walking toward the venue this time felt completely different. No band, no whispered warnings, no secret committees deciding my worth, just an honest acknowledgement of work I had genuinely done. When my name was called, the applause felt warm, not forced. It wasn't about the trophy. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about standing in a place I had been unfairly barred from and knowing I got there not by being perfect, but by refusing to stay silent. During the ceremony, I noticed something interesting. In the crowd, someone was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, not supportive, just observing. When our eyes met, they gave a small nod. For a moment, I wondered if they were the 7th person from the committee. But instead of questioning or confronting, I simply nodded back. Not as approval, but as a sign that I wasn't afraid anymore. If they had anything to hide, it wasn't my responsibility to go chasing after ghosts. The truth had already done its work. After the ceremony, I sat outside the building on one of the stone benches, letting the cool air settle around me. Everything felt quieter than before, not because the world had changed, but because I had. I realized that the whole journey had taught me something I never expected. Sometimes the conflict isn't about winning or losing. It's about understanding when to speak, when to stand still, and when to trust your instincts even when the whole system tries to silence you. People came and went around me, laughing, taking photos, carrying their awards. It all felt normal, almost simple. I knew life wouldn't suddenly become perfect. Every workplace had flaws. Every system had cracks. But this time, I understood that silence feeds problems while honesty exposes them. And honesty, no matter how unsettling, creates space for growth. Before leaving, I checked my phone one last time. The message about the 7th committee member was still there, untouched. I thought about replying, but then I realized something important. I didn't need to. The impact had already been made. The changes had already started. And whoever that last person was, they had lost their power the moment the truth was shared with everyone. Some endings don't require confrontation. Some endings simply require acceptance. As I walked toward the parking lot, I felt strangely proud. Not because I had solved everything, but because I had done something I never imagined, taken a stand in a story I didn't even know I was part of. The experience had tested my patience, my confidence, and even my sense of fairness. But in the end, it reminded me why transparency matters, why courage matters, and why one email, one simple decision to speak up, can genuinely change everything. Driving home, I opened the window and let the air rush in. For the first time in weeks, the knot in my chest loosened. I didn't worry about hidden committees or secret messages anymore. I didn't worry about whether someone was still watching. The truth had already spread through the company like sunlight entering a dark room, and once light touches something, it's almost impossible to return it to darkness. When I reached home, I took the award out of the box and placed it on my shelf, not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of the journey. It represented more than work performance. It represented resilience, trust, and the courage to ask hard questions when silence would have been easier. And as I looked at it, I realized the real twist of the story wasn't the hidden committee, or the threats, or the reveal. The real twist was how a moment of rejection, being banned from the award ceremony, became the turning point that reshaped everything. Sometimes life pushes you away from a door not to keep you out, but to force you to see what's happening behind it. With that thought, I finally felt at peace. The story had reached its conclusion, not with dramatic confrontation, but with clarity. And clarity was more powerful than any twist. The chapter closed naturally, with the kind of resolution that leaves you not waiting for the next problem, but grateful for the lesson the last one taught you.